how many years? 10 years now. And we have around, we record off our session. We have amazing guests like today. We have in our website around more than 100 recordings. So for people who are joining us for first time, you may want to take advantage of all of these amazing presentations. So we have some new participants today. Welcome to this community. This is a space for where we learn together. We also organize a conference once a year with Lily. Next year, we're thinking about meeting before ICF conference in Berlin, in Germany. So if you are thinking about going to the conference, you may consider going one day earlier. And also, we will always have a virtual piece. So we will also meet virtually at some point before. And in terms of announcements, Lily may have some announcements at the end. For today, we're going to jump into our topic today is about internal coach, supervisors working with internal coaches. We have two guests that it would be great if you introduce yourselves. And if for people who are just joining, we were asking everybody to introduce yourself in the chat box and writing where you're calling from. One of our goals with Lily is not only to bring educational programs, but also to create a community where people can connect and learn from each other. So this is one of our goals too. So welcome people who are just joining us, and let's get our two speakers today to introduce themselves and share anything you want to share with us.
Right. Thank you, Damian. And Liza and I are delighted to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. We're both from South Africa, so if there's anything in the accents you don't understand, then I would suggest that you ask, but we usually get by quite well. But sometimes our South African accents can be a bit tricky. So it is a great privilege for us to be here today and to talk to you about internal coaching. And we really and truly do come from the aspect of having been there, done that. And what we hope to share with you today is what did we do, what did we learn, and what do we take from that? And so we do welcome interaction and any questions that you might have. I also make the assumption, as Lily said in the beginning, that our profiles have been circulated. But in case you haven't read them, quick tour. I've been coaching since 2002, when South Africa didn't even know what coaching was. It was one of those things that the only people who had coaches were people who needed help. So we still had a long way to go back then. And I moved into the supervision space in 2012 when I did a supervision program, because I was quite, I didn't actually believe in supervision. So I was asked to please come along to a pilot program and see what I would think after the program had run. And I started practicing as a supervisor in 2013. I'm going to ask Liza just to give you a quick tour of her background, and then we can get going.
Thank you so much. So in the context of coaching and supervision, I trained as a coach in 2004. And when coaching and mentoring was part of my role, I was in the project space. But I soon realized that it was something I was very passionate about. And a few years later, was able to establish a coaching and mentoring center within an investment bank in South Africa. I ran that for 14 years, so as the coaching custodian, head of coaching. And for the last 3 years, I'm part of what we now call an external, so I left corporate, and I now work with the coaching company as head of coaching and business operations with the coaching panel. Trained as a supervisor in 2014, and then did the CSA International course in 2023. So part of the EMCC and CSA. So let me share our presentation, and Sharon can continue.
Right. Just a point of, do I drive this, or are you going to
There we
drive
go.
it, Lee? Okay. All right.
Just say to move on if you're done with the slide. Thanks.
Okay. So just a quick overview of what we're going to touch on. And when I say touch on, this is not going to be death by PowerPoint. Okay. There are slides with a few things on it. But we'll start off with what happened then, and then is when Lisa was in the coaching panel, or sorry, when Lisa was setting up the coaching panel in her organization, how well it went, and what was happening in the contracting space, I'll talk about, and then falling apart, because that is actually our story. It did fall apart, and just then to look at what's the ethical aspect, and then some time for Q&A, hopefully. Right. So I think we've done who's here, because I guess, Lily, that the majority of people online are supervisors as part of your network. We've covered our journey, but my role with the internal coaching panel was the role of supervisor to the internal coaches, which was, yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Okie dokes. So, Lee, let me pass on to you.
Yeah, so why did we build the internal panel, and what would we do differently now? So, as Sharon said, she trained as a coach before coaching was much known in South Africa. And so in 2009, the context in South Africa was coaching was often confused with being something remedial. You know, there was something wrong with someone and they were sent for a coach. And we took a center of excellence approach. So they part of the organization, in the L&D space, in the human capital space, coaching was offered by what we called external coaches. And there was a business case to take coaching opportunities further and deeper into the organization. And with setting up the coaching panel, it was never meant that an internal coaching panel would replace an executive coaching panel external to the organization. These were meant to work side by side. And it was all about matching for the need to the right coach, including leadership programs that had a coaching component, be it a coaching circle, group coaching, or individual leadership coaching. And so that was a part of a place for learning integration and practicing and being able to implement what was being learned. And so what I also saw, you know, having been already being a coach, but working internal to the organization, I wanted it to represent a professional coaching offering so that the coaches would subscribe to ongoing development. You know, they would have mentoring and supervision as part of it. So that was part there. It was endorsed by the head of human capital and the CEO at the time. So when we started, we had executive sponsorship. Very few frameworks. We chose a particular model and in fact co-created it because at that point, at that stage, there was nothing that was bespoke for internal coach training. So we borrowed from a particular model, external, but then I would do the internal modules. So what was relevant to coaching within an organizational system. And then how was the panel resourced and put together? So the original group of individuals were the sort of people who were known as they were probably more known as mentors, but they were the people who had coffee chats. And when someone had a conversation with them, they would say, "Thank you so much for that conversation. I feel so much more, I feel clearer on where I need to go now, on the conversation I need to have. They were just role models and gave a listening ear, and they were thinking partners. So these were, let's say, mentor role models that we were invited. And then in addition, we asked some of our human capital partners, who are those really strong people leaders and people in your different business units? Because these are individuals we would like to offer the opportunity to, that we were experimenting with this. And so it was by invitation. And South Africa was very young at that time. We didn't have necessarily have other organizations we could refer to. So we really did it grassroots at the time. And if we were doing it again, what would we do differently? And I think, what I spoke about in terms of selection, we didn't know who we were inviting in some instances, taking word of mouth, it was easier in years to come. I think by the time I left 14 years later, we had done 8 rounds of training, sort of every second year, another training cohort. And at that point, it was very aspirational. And, the profession and the opportunity and the offering was well known and well regarded. But I think that the selection process would be a lot more stringent. How you select, what are the criteria? We did psychometric assessments, and we looked at people in relation to the role and the competencies and the capabilities of the skills of coaching and mentoring. But there's a lot more in terms of their willingness to contribute, to be committed, to being in supervision, that it was not optional. For the first 2 years of each cohort going through training, I would play the role as internal supervisor and as mentor. And that was largely to, I guess, foster, to educate the new coaching cohorts and the individuals and the groups of what supervision really is and what it takes to get an internal coaching practice going. Very different, because your client base is provided to you. It's not like an external executive coach who's building their own, marketing their own brand and seeking their own clients. You've got a captive audience, but it was very much around making sure that professional side of things was well known, and so quite educational in the first instances. But I would make supervision a prerequisite from the very start. And I think starting again, partnering with external supervisors, I think you need that external kind of almost the step away, the slight distance from the organization, to have everybody connected to the actual organization can be a little tricky. And I think that links to the psychological safety. What I found a lot in the earlier days was a vulnerability, not just in terms of building confidence as a coach, but also supervision was sometimes seen as a performance conversation. Like somebody is checking up on me and making sure that I'm performing correctly as a coach. And it was an interesting thing to note. And I mean, Sharon can vouch to this. In the early days, it's sometimes quite a challenge to have people commit to supervision. And it wasn't a nice to have. It was a prerequisite around keeping, being aware of blind spots, about is keeping neutral and also a place to learn and grow. And yeah, that was important. So whilst the ground was prepared in terms of executive buy-in, what became a challenge was when there was a change in CEO or a change in human capital, and that the original sponsor was no longer as strong, or the new sponsor was no longer as bought into and committed to the coaching offering. But that is something I'm still not certain about, how you can be sure that transition to a new executive sponsor is smooth and remains an organizational strength, not something that gets in the way. And let's go here for you, Sharon.
Thank you. Thank you. You can move on. So I'll tell you a funny story, but Lee was running the coaching panel at the organization, and I didn't know her at all, but I knew that that was her role. And so I applied to become an external coach, and I'm afraid I was declined. So that's really where the funny story that Lisa and I share is that I didn't crack the nod to join the panel at that point. Later I did. But the role that I played as a supervisor, initially we started out and I could see who were the people that kept coming back. I could see the pattern and why they were coming. They didn't always have a case, but they were there because they really wanted to learn. And it wasn't mandatory. Later on, there was a requirement for them to attend X number of supervision sessions in a year. But in order to ensure that supervision is entrenched and an intrinsic part of internal coaching, there are some things that have to happen. And many of these are hindsight, but this clear mandate of the supervisor, of the coach knowing that they have access to supervision, that supervision is not bumped out because of a meeting, and that it's not there because something has gone wrong. And so the coaches who came to supervision, I could see the way that they grew. And these conditions for sustainability, in my opinion, and in hindsight, at the time, some of them were missing. And I think the biggest wobble came when the organization, as so many organizations have in the past few years, started to downsize. And then the number of people who wanted coaches grew, and the coaches themselves often were likely to be affected or certainly impacted by the downsizing. And so a lot of the supervision space became for the coaches very cathartic. And so there was a point at when that was going on in the organization that there was definitely a queue. We used to run 2 sessions a month, different supervisors, and all the sessions were full. When I say full, a maximum of 6 people in a session. So we were regularly seeing 12 coaches a month. And at that time it was being championed and had started to become mandatory. So there was records being kept of who attended and how often they'd attended, and I think this did make a difference, but I do think the internal issues in the organization actually forced so many of the coaches, well, not forced, but they needed somewhere to go, and they found supervision to be that space. Thank you.
So the contracting landscape and why contracting matters more here. This really is vital. And so in the coaching supervision context, it's the organization, the individual coach, and the group simultaneously that you're holding in mind. And the ambiguity about who the client is, that does create an ethical risk if unnamed. And where contracting is weak or absent, problems tend to surface, often in crisis. But contracting is ongoing. It's a living conversation. It's never a once-off event. So the different contracting layers, and within an organization, there is contracting that happens with different levels of the coaching custodian. So from an organizational perspective, from a leadership perspective, from an executive perspective, there can be the head of human capital, it can be the head of learning and development. In my case, I reported to the head of human capital, so as the coaching custodian. And so the contracting around supervision was making sure that we had experienced effective supervisors as part of the panel, and what was that arrangement. But we were looking at the individuals and the group supervision, the group supervision groups as part of that organization. So making sure that the people in a supervision group weren't working together, they weren't reporting lines, who they were coaching. It was very, very important that that names weren't named in and divisions weren't named in sessions, because it becomes so much more. It's trickier to be able to just keep that neutrality, keep that confidentiality, and all that is held there. But what the organization needed to know is that this wasn't a place of performance management for any coach or any individual. We weren't going to share information. I mean, we know this as coaches, the confidentiality and the level of detail around coaching assignments that is shared. This was not a place where we were going to surface anything like that. What we could share would be things like themes that we needed to know. So, for example, Sharon mentions the number of people impacted by an organizational restructure or change or downsizing. If these sort of things were happening, the conversations that were held within a group or with an individual coach, we could share some of the themes, but never the detail. And what was of paramount importance was that the individual coach knew that it was safe to bring what they needed to bring ethically, to be sure that their blind spots could be just a place to reflect, a place to grow, a place to just be better and better professionally at what they were doing, and to regard this role as a professional contribution that they would be growing. For many of the individuals, they were also looking at a future for themselves, coaching external to the organization as a future career. And it was important that they could take it that seriously, that it had huge value. And then the group conflict, so that we knew what could be shared within the group, so that just ethically and with integrity, that would keep that space. So what might be missing? What might we not have named? And I'd like to invite that into the room. Is there someone who's sitting with something that they'd like to just add that should also be considered?
This isn't a missing, it's more of a question, which is, even if you don't have reporting relationships and you don't have people who are working together, how do you develop psychological safety when they're in the same organization? That's always been something I'm curious about.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's how you agree to be together. And so so much the responsibility of the space holder, the supervisor as the space holder. And it is something that grows. I think, you know, the coaching profession, by nature, these are individuals who are willing to bring a bit more of the personal side of themselves. But it is, there's so much around how we will be together, how we offer that space and the continuous contracting around it, each session, renaming.
Perhaps I can also come in here and say, as the supervisor, that one of the contracting elements that I always brought in was if someone is bringing a case and you are in the group and you know who they're talking about, I would ask people to excuse themselves. And that actually did work. I had one or two occasions where people knew exactly who was being discussed and they were quite happy to step out in the conversation. So for me, that was one of the contracting pieces. And interestingly enough, as trust grew, I often had the same people coming to the same groups. And as trust grew, I certainly found that the level of ease with which people would share, and you know, you don't have to share names, but if you're in the organization, you usually know who they're talking about because you know what's going on. So it's a great question, Deb. Thank you. I see Luis.
Yes, my question, Lisa and Sharon, you are talking about internal coaches. I am working in France in two organizations that they call mentors, internal mentors, because they are not certified coaches. So they are mentor, they are volunteer, they are not paid, they are part of the total salary income that they have from the company, and they are trained. So I am acting as a certified coach to support them, those mentors, to follow the competence and really be aligned on the practice, creating the space of safety, having an objective, having more the creation of awareness more than being a consultant of the mentoree or the mentee. So this is part of the scope, or you are talking about internal coaches that are certified?
Yeah, in this particular context, it was for certified coaches.
Okay,
so
okay.
It did have a coaching context. We didn't offer the same for mentors in quite the same way. Yeah.
Okay. Because this is a practice that is more and more common in the organization, that they have volunteer mentors that they are trained. So I do this training just to support them, and they do the best practice, but they are not educated on coaching, no, officially and formally.
I think it's equally valuable for mentors, a reflective space.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're off as it can be quite lonely and intimidating if they don't have that place to engage and reflect and ask questions.
Right. Yeah. And as the coffee chat that you mentioned, is better having an internal mentor than no one really having that offer, not to the other colleague. Sorry, Sharon.
No, Louise, I was just going to say that as positioned as a formal mentor, I think one of the most valuable trainings they can go through is how to have coaching conversations.
Yeah.
Not necessarily how to be a coach, but how do you have a coaching conversation?
Absolutely. It's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Any other questions before we move? No, I can't see if there are hands or they'll pop up.
And there is another place for questions a little further on. Yeah.
Okay. So that lovely term, when things fall apart, when panels unravel. And so this is in this particular situation, this is exactly what happened. The first thing that happened was the budget was taken away. So no budget for supervisors to come in and offer supervision. There were two of us, and this was after Liza had departed. There were two of us, and so we were told that there's no budget. They're trying to get budget now. But the shift in leadership, which is where your strongest link can become your weakest link. The champion of the coaching moves out and someone else comes in. And usually when someone else comes in organizationally in a big role, one of the first things they have to do is cut costs. And what better place to cut costs than these expensive coach training programs? Okay. So that was definitely one of the triggers. And then the panel themselves, it was interesting, I think in one of the last conversations that I had with some of the coaches, some of the internal coaches, there was a sadness at the fact that there was a decrease in focus. So supervision wasn't mandatory. There wasn't going to be any supervision because there wasn't a budget. And a lot of them were, so a few of them were trained team coaches with Peter Hawkins. And so a lot of their work was moving into teams because of the restructuring. Because as teams were being whittled down, so the coaches were really having to do that work. If I was to look back and say from my perspective that there were some things that were not addressed. So it sounds like quite a simple thing, but internal coaches very seldom had the opportunity for a three-way. And if they did have the opportunity for a three-way, there was a strong possibility of the power play because just positional power. The line manager of the coachee has positional power, and immediately you are in that kind of line, there's some neutralizing that goes on for the coach. So three-ways were not mandatory. They were not, they really weren't, there weren't enough of them. And contracting was not what we as external coaches or practicing coaches, the rigor of contracting was also missing. And I think Liza is well aware that was, there was just a lack of skill on how to contract and even a requirement to contract. So then that whole thing about being caught in the middle. Here I am with you and you want to talk to me because you're going to be retrenched or you've been put into a pool or you've been given some options, and I'm actually in the same boat myself. So the difficulty of maintaining, I mean, whose side do I go to as an internal coach? Am I going to, it's a real ethical dilemma. So I think we did pretty well as supervisors, myself and a colleague of mine. I think we did well. We held good groups, good attendance, right up to the point at which the budget went away. And I think we did pretty well with them, given the circumstances. The organization was in a massive restructure, and that causes, what that causes in the system is quite tumultuous, and there's lots of grieving and there's lots of loss, and we certainly were caught in the middle of that. Thanks, Lee. Yeah. So some of these ethical issues, and yeah, I think, putting it into the ethics category, ethics seems to have become a lot louder in the last few years, but the confidentiality is a challenge. As I said, I would ask people to remove themselves if they felt that they shouldn't be in the conversation. But everyone knows what's going on. This conflicts of interest was competing commitments. What the internal coach is actually competing with, they've got a job at stake. They want to be the voice, the listening ear. They want to support the colleague, but there are competing commitments. And I do think they tried as hard as they could. And then the recurring challenge of role clarity. Where does the coaching relationship begin and where does it end? So I think, looking at this, as you know, as supervisors, that, and certainly a good 70% of what comes up in supervision can usually be tied right back to contracting. And so there definitely needs to be a rigorous way of contracting for internal coaches, given everything else that's in the space. And so I think that it's, for me, very sad that they have dispensed with supervision. We're hoping that it'll come back in this particular situation. And I certainly felt that I was part of something wonderful, actually, when I had myself had experience of being in an organization that was downsizing and didn't have anyone that I could talk to. So I think that having the listening ears there was really very powerful. And we can always, in hindsight, say, what could we have done differently? Yeah. Lisa, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll add one thing that I also found to be a conflict of interest. Well, the competing loyalties, competing priorities. Very often the internal coach, they had a great love for the opportunity to coach and found it incredibly meaningful and enriching. But sometimes they would come across their personal line manager who felt that that was a conflict of interest for them, that they were being paid to do their day job. And so the hours that they were devoting to coach 2 or 3 clients during a month, it wasn't a huge ask. It wasn't as if they were coaching 2 or 3 people every day. It was spread over a month, and the accountability was them in terms of managing the hours. But some line managers just didn't have that vision of the power of the coaching. And that was quite sad to sometimes see individuals having to withdraw from the team because of a non-supportive line manager. And yes, they were paid salaries for the organization, but what they were offering was so much bigger. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just been looking at the chat and your comment there, Lily. This particular organization made a massive investment in the coach training. We got the best people in. They actually went through the process of getting ICF credentialing for their program, and they were. Once you get that, of course, all your program leaders have got to be PCC. And they really went all the way out to provide really good coach training. So it's quite sad when you think of that investment. Although, let me say that some of those people who were part of the fallout of the restructure are now in a position to carry on with a coaching career because they've had the training, and quite a few of them are going for their credentials now. Well, a couple that I know of, yeah.
Mm.
I'm just
Yeah,
also.
so yeah, I can't see the comments at this point, but soon when we're done with this slide and we go to an open question time, but I just thought perhaps to leave these questions with you, considering where you offer yourself as a supervisor for internal coaches. How explicitly have I contracted at all those levels, organizational, coach, and group, depending on what you offer for your supervision? And where am I noticing the ethical tension in my work with internal coaches? Am I naming it? And what structural conditions are present or absent in the panel that you support? And what would you do differently if you were setting this up today, if you've been involved in setting up such a function? Oops, let me stop sharing.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you. So happy to take any questions, thoughts, comments. What's useful, not useful?
I fully agree on the comment that was made about some line manager are not supporting the volunteer mentor, internal mentor in the organization that I am working for. And any tips? How do we handle that?
It's a hard one. What would sometimes happen is that the individual would need to, they can't go behind their manager's back. And what Lily's saying is it works best when there is a contractual arrangement. But that person is paying their main salary, and they do carry the bulk of they carry the decision at the end of the day. I would say that the coach would have to continue informally, if it's something that they're committed to because it's part of a future profession that they're working towards, they would have to coach after hours in their private capacity and still to continue. You can't fight against an organizational system that, requires you to work X number of hours and pays your salary. It's just one of those very unfortunate things. Did have to work that through, process that with a few individuals.
Yeah. So I have the human resource that is from my side. So we try to influence this line manager sometime. The most important is to have the volunteer from the mentor, the internal mentor, because that person is the one who needs to drive the passion on that human connection with other individual. And then the line manager try to influence, but sometimes it's not easy to handle.
Yeah, I think the other element also that one cannot discount is the organizational culture. It plays such a significant role, and what you're experiencing is probably a reflection of that.
You are absolutely right, Sharon. We asked the CEO to send a message to say, kudos for the mentor volunteer in the organization, and that changed a little bit the position of the line manager. We have much more support because from the top was a support on the program. That's a good strategy. Yes, I agree.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sunny, I see you have your hand up.
I want to thank you both, Liza and Sharon. And my question is kind of multi-level. It has to do with the fact that you were establishing this internal coaching in a country, in a larger systemic time of the country itself. How diverse were the individuals in the business or the company that you were working with? how much the political influences really made a difference, because you talked about the change in leadership and the change in culture and attitude of those who were running the company, how much that influenced your internal process and the ability to address the concerns of the employees in the company.
Oh, Sunny, thank you so much for that question, because that was definitely kept top of mind to ensure that there was diversity from every angle, as you know, considered in the makeup of the panel. And we actually partnered with the DEI, the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion team, as well as the wellness team, both of those angles, to make sure that, you know, this was highly regarded, that, you know, this was about people being able to be coached by someone like them, if that was what was important. And as part of the matching process, it was often named, you know, what coach is going to make, who would you want as a coach who's going to make the most difference to your growth? And this borders on the mentoring side of things too, because there was a big conversation around, I want to be coached, for example, I'm going to name it, by an African female who's gone the route that I'm wanting to go, that I can know that she has faced the struggles that I'm busy facing. And so with great sensitivity, we had both a mentoring program and then obviously in the coaching space, it was a big part of succession planning, you know, talent management, leadership transition. Still is today. It's vital.
Because I think from a systemic perspective, even here in the States or all over the world, regardless of whether you're even companies are invested in, you know, DEI, inclusion, whatever you want to call it, it makes a big difference internally how those people really feel that their concerns are being addressed, and how, as you pointed out, how comfortable they can even be in terms of bringing up those issues. And if there's anything going on, coaching would be the point that may be able to address that. Unfortunately, a lot of companies now have even dropped that idea. So it's really unfortunate. And I had not been, well, I was in South Africa right before you started this program, but you know, being in a business context and hearing about the concerns people had, it was just incredible that you even got to start this program. And, you know, I don't know, I know some other people who were coaching at that time, but kudos, that's all I can say, for your taking the opportunity and the courage to do that, because even here now, it's very, very challenging.
Yeah, thanks, Sunny.
Jeff.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for bringing this topic forward. I think we need even more discussion and research around supervision for internal coaching. I have a question about the what you brought up of, so for the internal coaches, is supervision required, encouraged? Is it optional? I've been supervising at a global technology firm for 2 years, and at the beginning and launch of supervision, it was strongly encouraged and people participated. And as you noted, the more people who participate over time experience the value, so they just keep coming back. And others dropped off. Some people changed jobs, others retired. The company's about to train 10 new internal coaches, and they're going to make the supervision required. If you're going to be a coach, then you have to come to so many sessions a year, et cetera. And I think that might work with their culture. What have you seen and experienced with the required, optional, encouraged in even other organizations, or heard has worked or not worked? Knowing that it's all culturally contextual to that company, I'm still curious what's actually happening in that space.
Do you want to respond first?
Yeah, let me respond first. I mean, knowing what I know now, 17, 18 years later, I would make it part of the contract up front. I think it's no longer a nice to have. It's a prerequisite. And I think we're seeing that in the credentialed coaching bodies looking at that as a competence too, because I think there's one thing about continuous development, and coaches invariably love adding on training and building out their toolkit and what have you, but this to be seen as equally important as part of professional development. I think it's kind of keeping yourself in integrity, and ensuring that the coaches, I think as part of the selection criteria, if you're not willing to commit to something that important because of the responsibility of the professional standing that you have and you're holding, I would say it's part of governance, it's part of professional integrity.
Thank you.
Sharon, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, the supervision thing is I guess I don't have to tell you that it's starting to take center stage at the moment. So back in 2013, I was invited to the USA by ICF. I was the current chapter president at the time, and that's in fact where I met Lily at that particular event. And I think I was fresh off my supervision training, so I was quite zealous about supervision. And it was met with blank faces, largely in that ICF community. It was, and I'm talking majority of like the coaches that were there majority were from America. And there was this resistance to supervision because of the idea of a supervisor looking over my shoulder. As we know, from an ICF perspective, there's been a lot of work, and this has now started to change, and we're going to see some more changes around this. So I think that it's really up to the organization to apply some kind of a formula as to how many hours of coaching requires you to, how many hours of supervision. I think it has to be mandated. And there has to be consequence for your role as an internal coach, or your role as an internal coach, because come the day when the internal coach is no longer internal, that supervision is hours that they attended is going to be very important to them. So there's now an incentive, a different incentive that wasn't there before. That's just my thinking, Jeff.
Yeah. Thank you for that article, Beth. We'll look at that. Gigi, and I think last question, and then it's for Lily's wrap up.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. This is really very informative. I am a internal coach, internal coaching program manager. So we have coaches, internal coaches in our organization. And partly you answered my question already, which is like, what would you say is the minimum requirement for supervision? Sharon alluded to like the number of hours of coaching is required for how many supervision. So I also wanted to ask about individual supervision versus group supervision. How do you see that playing out? I mean, when I learned about supervision and was trained under Damian to be a supervisor, we tried to implement it in our program. The first time, yes, people came on, and they never really were trying to implement it, but because of budget crisis and a lot of internal changes in our organization, we haven't really truly mandated it. So now this is really a great reminder for me to kind of bring back supervision to our program. And so what would you say to that individual supervision or group supervision, and how many do you think coaching hours that is required to get supervised?
Yeah, I would recommend a group once a quarter at least. That was what we'd said, is to come once a quarter to supervision group. And it didn't matter how many coaching hours. I think it was just that regularity was important. The group construct is useful as a learning group. So there's a normative, supportive, restorative piece there. I think very important, but always with the offer of, if you would like an individual session, then please reach out. But I think it's also budget related, so you can reach more people in a group than one-on-one.
Yeah, this is exactly what I do. So I have the group we call co-development, because it's, as you said, Liza, is a sharing knowledge and practice, but the individual supervision is optional. I like the idea to become mandatory, because I think that will help for the quality and consistency of the profession. But both are important. They should coexist, one per quarter and the other based on maybe each internal mentor or coach.
Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
I think our time is up, Lily.
Yes.
Thank you, Liza and Sharon. This, as you can tell, this is a hot topic. It sounds like we need to bring this back a couple more times at least. I know some of us work as external to an internal, and some are internal as well, supervisors, and that alone has its own challenges. So thank you again. And can you just put your email addresses in the chat box in case anyone wants to reach out to you? Our next session is on August the 17th, and Inga will be talking with us about self-disclosure in the supervision space. And then September 21st, Sherry Matheson and Carrie Woodcock will be coming to talk with us about team coaching supervision. So we hope to see you there.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
coming, everybody.
Thank you,
Anything
everyone.
to add, Damian?
No,
Thank
something
you.
that just a brief announcement that we're going to start with Lily group supervision programs. If anybody is interested in group supervision, let us know, or we can send you the information.
Right, I forgot about that. Yes. All right. See you all next month. Thanks for
Thank
coming.
See
you.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.